And a huge welcome to this preeminent panel. Looking forward to talking about how we deal with AI readiness and emergent issues in the light of the regulation and the organizations that we work in. And if we could perhaps give a brief introduction to who we are and how AI readiness is useful to us in our day jobs.
Sure, Kim Prado. AI readiness is extremely useful to us in our day jobs because it's enabling us to move faster within an extremely regulated world.
Nahal Patel, G Research. For those who aren't familiar, we build models for algorithmic trading. So I joined to help GR build its AI capabilities, Gen AI capabilities.
Prachi, Kasodhan, I'm the enterprise CTO within Microsoft, servicing our financial services clients. Pretty much, Kim, what you said, that's really almost become my day job. How do we help our clients scale and do it responsibly?
Nice to be here. My name is Johnna Powell. I lead technology research and innovation at DTCC. AI readiness is something I think of on a day-to-day basis, and it's something we've been working on over the last year.
Wonderful. Thank you, everybody. So, coming back to you, Johnna, at the end, DTCC has a critical role in the global financial markets. Can you talk about some of the adoption hindrances that generative AI faces in your organization?
Yes, absolutely. So I think as some of you know here, DTCC is arguably one of the most highly regulated firms in the world. And so thus AI adoption is quite difficult for us. But that being said, even one of the most powerful innovators, Vitalik Buterin, the founder of Ethereum, once said, "Look, AI technology is fundamentally different from other technologies, so you would benefit from being careful." So I think a couple of the hindrances that we've faced really focus around four themes. One is around governance and policy framework. Another one is around rigorous testing and piloting. Another one is around regulatory and compliance considerations. And finally, just collaboration across multiple teams. Within governance and policy frameworks, I think like many of you, when ChatGPT and Gen AI became a really big thing, there were no real internal policies for how we should be using AI across DTCC. It was something we had to make up. It was something we had to research. It was something we had to problem solve cross-functionally. And so what we did was we established an AI readiness working group across multiple teams at DTCC. And we developed a policy, and we published it in January 2024, and it just established basic rules of the road, AI do's and don'ts, how to use AI at DTCC, and also how to onboard tools at DTCC. So I think that was really useful to just kind of get us kick-started. Another one, though, was thinking about among the hundreds, if not thousands of tools we could potentially bring into DTCC, how are we going to select and prioritize those tools? So we came up with a pretty rigorous prioritization methodology among about 400 different use cases and multiple tools that could address those use cases. But really what we did was we put a pretty careful lens on the tools that we would onboard. One was that the tools would have to fit within our security regulations and our security requirements. Two, they would have to be compatible with our legacy systems. And three, they would have to show an actual ROI that was measurable. So that worked out pretty well for us. We ran about 12 different pilots over the last year. The next one was around regulatory compliance. And so we talked with the SEC and the Fed and multiple regulators on a very regular basis. And so, even though there wasn't necessarily established regulation around how to use AI, we had to make sure that they were comfortable around our approach to bringing on AI, to onboarding AI tools into DTCC. So that just took, multiple conversations. And I think the last one, it goes without saying, you have to have a cross-functional relationship across departments.
lessons from all the way back through DevOps and silo breakdowns, still more than relevant today. 400 use cases is a huge amount, and segues us very nicely into the AI readiness framework, as Gab's just spoken about, finding concrete use cases for something that can be very abstract and have so many different permutations. Just repeating the call, please do jump in and have a look. So, Prachi, at Microsoft, of course, many organizations here will be consuming your services, and you're one of the largest providers of generative AI in general. What are the largest threats to Gen AI that you see from a provider's perspective, and what are the dangers and issues that you think we'll see evolve into the future?
Yeah, thank you for that question. First of all, again, thanks for having me. I think, Joanna, you touched on some very key points, right? As somebody who's consuming AI, what does that mean? And goes without saying, AI has been such a force multiplier. What we need to really figure out as an ecosystem here is how do we do this responsibly? So from Microsoft's perspective, I want to just take a step back a little bit. This is, I mean, we've been at this for almost 10 plus years at this point. And starting 2018, kind of where you were saying how DTCC started or others on the stage have similar experience, within Microsoft, even before Gen AI or ChatGPT back in 2017, 2018, we essentially said as an organization, what are some of our AI principles? So before we even get into the tactics of how we are going to secure and protect, what are the principles that Microsoft as a company believes in? And we came up with a few, 6 to be, total, and essentially those are, I see, becoming almost an industry standards at this point. So it starts with fairness. You've got to make sure that the system you're developing is going to be fair, first and foremost. Reliable. That goes into, I think, a lot of hallucination and the outputs that I'm getting out of the system. Is that going to be something that I can rely on? Safety and security that you touched on. Something that, hey, can I keep my users' information private? That weaves in the privacy piece. And the point that you mentioned, between security, fairness, reliability, if you weave in foundational accountability and transparency, which means when you are sitting in front of your consumers, your employees, or essentially regulators that you touched on, you need to be able to prove to them without a shadow of doubt, to extent possible, that A, the system was transparent, it was able to do what it said it would do, and there was a human in the loop, that it's accountable. So those were like kind of the 6 grounding principles to us. But getting back to just brass tacks, how does Microsoft think about it? So when we have been rolling out a lot of these products into the market, what we followed is a 4-step process. Every time we think of a use case, we essentially go through 4 steps. First and foremost, what we do is map. We essentially sit down. So this is from an engineering group's perspective and cross-collaboration. They sit down and essentially go through every possible risk we think that the system can actually have. And that risk could be a security risk, it could be hallucination risk, or prompt injection, or reliability risk, but we map everything. Then we essentially go back and look at measurement, because depending on the use case, one risk may be more important than the other. Not everything is going to be exactly the same. So that lets us prioritize which ones we are going to really go after. Mitigate, we use lots of different things, whether it's content filtering, whether it is grounding the model, or we are essentially looking at prompt engineering. We find most of these risks that we identify can basically be boiled down to these 3 solutions for most part. And then last but not the least, once we've actually deployed it, we don't deploy it and then wait in the wild to get feedback. As you can imagine, we have test harnesses before we actually even deploy, and there is a continuous act of monitoring the system. So that's a very essential part of operationalizing. You've done everything, but then you've got to kind of put it out there and see, are there newer risks emerging? Then that impact that use case and the things that are standing behind.
Wonderful. Thank you for a comprehensive answer. So as part of the AI strategy of any organization, of course, the sanctity and provenance of the model risk management is a key question. How do we know where it's come from? How do we know what it might be doing? And the observational pieces, observability and production. So Kim, at BMO, how has model risk management evolved in your organization to deal with some of the complexities that AI introduces different to other supply chains, and what best practices can you share with us?
So first of all, model risk seems to be one of those things that enable us to move slower, right? And we've got to work on how to fix that as an industry. I think that's a very, very important point. And it comes down to like all the vendors, for example, in the room with .ai on the end of their name. Every time you walk into a client with .ai in your name, you're going to get more scrutiny. So if your app isn't really doing true AI, you may want to think about that. I'm not being funny. Like, I'm dead serious, actually, because at the end of the day, our model risk folks are trying to keep us safe. Our compliance folks, our procurement folks, et cetera, their job is to keep us safe. And whenever the industry is trying something new or it's heating up by the regulators, it starts to get, even harder to get something through to actually drive the impact of change that our business is craving and needs to compete for the future. So I'm extremely passionate about this working group for a number of reasons. One, from a BMO, like from my perspective in my role, it's extremely helpful for me to have the common cloud controls tied in with this, the way Gab had on the slide. Because if you think about it end to end, if you can prove end to end that your entire chain of execution is safe and secure from beginning to end, you're going to go faster with model risk. That's one. The second thing is being able to build in the explain up front at every hop is so important. If you revert back to the first principles around P&L explain and being able to sit down with a desk head and show them how you got their actual P&L, all the steps you had to do. Well, this really isn't that much different. You have to be able to explain how you got to your solution or your suggestion. And I would say the third thing is the data and making sure that your model risk people understand the data set that you're ingesting into this model as well. One of the things that I've just recently finished up is testing and going live with a vendor product that is a true AI model. And they were trying to vet the model similar to how they vet a model, say, for risk management. And one thing isn't the same. So it's really important that you work with your model risk people to make sure they understand the outcome that you're trying to get from this implementation up front. So when I talk about model vetting, one of the things I'm looking at is platforms that can help them. So there's a couple companies out there that I've been looking at that are actually starting to evolve to help you test the model vetting process without using AI. And that, to me, is the key.
It's interesting that LLM as a judge is one of the controls that many organizations end up falling back on, and then we're in a kind of an LLM echo chamber almost of sort of non-combative adversarial AI. Right, thank you very much. And Nihal, G Research has a different angle perhaps from the rest of everyone up here. You have a slightly different regulatory lens as a result of working in a slightly different way. Perhaps you could just outline that briefly and sort of the way that you work. And so from the buy side, how is your model risk management evolving again, to cope with some of the complexities of AI, but from a different regulatory standpoint?
Definitely. Just to set a context, for instance, we only have one client that consumes the models we create. So the governance and policies that we put in place for Gen AI are really focused on protecting our trade secrets. That's been our primary focal point. Last year it became clear that Gen AI is a technology that we could use not only to make forecasts, but probably increase our internal productivity. So we wanted to put in governance that protected our trade secrets, but also allowed us to innovate. And we wanted to be systematic about it. So the policies that we put in place, we tried to guide them by what we perceive to be the delta between open source and commercial models, the abilities of those two classes of models. So if we were able to run something on-prem that addresses the trade secrets issue, and then it became clear in 2023, last year, that no, actually, if we want to be at the forefront of this field, to develop this capability, we're going to need to come up with an actual policy to handle commercial models. And our approach was really to just see what existing governance structures we had in place that we could leverage. So we had concepts of data owners, data classification, and so the initial policies basically put the burden on business managers to, we gave them some guidelines of what any AI, commercial AI technology could or could not do, and it was up to the business managers and the data owners to actually verify that they were in compliance. And then as the ecosystem has grown, and now there's all the .ai companies that we're interested in engaging with, we then developed a procurement policy where our procurement team can go in and answer most of those questions. And if they're met, then a certain classification of data is available to those systems. And then, the things that we're still working on is that, well, we have lots of vendors that are now adding AI capabilities to their platforms, and we need a proactive process to go and engage them to see what their roadmap is and have a way of controlling which features we opt in and opt out from. And then now as the delta seems to be compressing between commercial models and open source models, our focus might switch from a pure governance model to more of a guidance, like when is it commercially viable to use one versus the other?
It's fascinating to talk about the existing governance structures because, of course, again, the AI Readiness Group has been really focused on that differential between, we're working in regulated organizations. We know we've got decent OPSEC. We know that we've got good enterprise security architectures, but then the new things that emerge and talking about data as the lifeblood of so many companies, that management of the supply chain of that data is a commonality that I think is still yet to be fully addressed across the industry at large. So talking about the open source and commercial models then, Prachi, what are the security considerations from your perspective when you're considering those, the foundational versus the open source models from a safe consumption usage from your customers?
Absolutely. If it's okay, let me try to answer that not just from a security perspective, because what we find is, at least that's what I'm finding in my travels, and I think, Nehal, you touched on it a little bit, there are lots of different considerations as organizations are thinking about open source LLM versus a closed. So almost think of it like an open LLM versus closed LLM. Security is absolutely one of them. I'll get to the, just to kind of, give you the punchline, I think there is space for both. And it really will boil down, that's what we're realizing, it's really gonna boil down to what your use case is and where the trade-offs are. And what do I mean by trade-offs? So as an example, if you are thinking you need the fastest and the most democratic innovation, obviously the answer ends up being an open source model. Because from a closed source perspective, you're going to get a lot of really, really good resources and sophistication going into that model, but you are beholden on the vendor of who owns that closed source model to actually give you that release, right? So open source kind of, if democratic access and democratic innovation is a key thing, then maybe that's one thing to consider about. If you are thinking from a security perspective, it depends. Honestly, I don't think there is a clear winner here. And here's what I mean. If you're looking at an open source model, and if it's small enough, and you think you're a larger enterprise company that can actually host it on-prem, and because the data is, let's say, highly secure, or you really, really worried about IP going out the door, or you feel like you don't have the right authentication model, right data lineage, it's just not super clean right now. So it could be the maturity of the company. You may choose to do a smaller open source model on-prem. And then think about if I scale and when I scale, what am I gonna do? The other flip side to look at it is open source can take time. Because now you are choosing to build a lot of belts and harnesses and security and regulatory compliance and automation, all of that stuff by yourself, or you're relying on the community. Whereas if you go with the closed source model, a lot of it is already done for you, right? You have API calls. You are basically able to get to market faster. So I say all of this not to kind of say one versus the other, but just to kind of say this is a very fluid situation. And what we are finding is most people are being fairly pragmatic. Outside of their POCs, most of the customers from a Microsoft perspective, we see even within banking, they are actually playing with both open source and closed source model for specific use cases. And essentially we find, as I said, it's super fluid. 2023, I think I was reading somewhere, 90% of the market was closed source models. Versus now in 2024, open source is catching up almost 30–40% of it. And I expect like next year it's probably going to change again, because jury's still out, I think, where the use cases will finally end up settling and what's the most important thing for financial services. The one thing I will say, kind of where you were going, is irrespective of what you end up using, I think what we are all saying is what we find is from a readiness perspective, getting the governance right. Understanding your threat, understanding your security, irrespective of the model, which honestly will become commodity. It is starting to become commodity. That's not going to be the big question. The interesting question is, once you take the model, what is your application doing? What's your IP? What are you developing? So I go back to getting that governance right is going to be super critical. And I think that's where, you know, the work that Finos is doing, that's the reason I'm very excited about what we are doing here.
I agree very strongly indeed, yes. Fantastic. I mean, one of those points around the foundational open source view is that I know the OSI, the Open Source Initiative, are coming out with the definition of what an open source model will actually be. And one of the points made by some of the board there was, we don't have to have the training data to reproduce this model, because there may be privacy elements. You know, we want to know the output of a model that gives us information about car crash side effects, but we can't share the data that goes in to the front door. So it's still, as you say, it's an extremely fluid space when the OSI haven't even strongly defined that yet, but it looks like that direction of travel will support that as well. Right, but back to you, Johnna. In terms of what you do at DTCC, are you making steps to foster innovation, and how does that work for you in your organization?
Yes, absolutely. So, you know, we're really passionate about AI, even despite regulatory concerns and everything else. And we strongly believe that, you know, Gen AI is a world-changing, life-changing, career-changing technology. And so, you know, we want to we want to push it as much as we possibly can across DTCC. And we also believe that you're going to get the ROI out of your investment as long as you put the investment in the right place. So with respect to some innovation initiatives that we're putting on just in Q4 alone, one is an innovation showcase, and that's actually going to be on Monday of next week. It's more internal. But we have a lot of vendors coming as well, so it'll be, you know, a bunch of DTCC teams showcasing their projects within AI, within blockchain, within you know, quantum and other emerging technologies. It'll be vendors also showcasing some of their solutions. So that's one way we, you know, bring the community together. Another is an industry-wide hackathon. We're currently designing that right now, and what we want it to do is to address real industry pain points and foster collaboration across industry players so that we can actually show how, when the industry comes together, maybe shares data, you know, to solve problems that have been pretty difficult to solve previously, like, you know, trade anomaly detection or, you know, fraud detection, things like that. We're hoping to, you know, just to kind of cast a wide net across the community, across the industry, to see what creative ideas that we can bring forth. And another one is just a continuation of our academic partnerships. So we have some pretty close academic partners in Duke, at NYU, and also at Cambridge University. We've got a fantastic program at Duke University where we can bring a lot of our DTCC colleagues to just present an idea, a use case to Duke students, and they will spend a semester working that out and bringing back the research to us.
Fantastic. Strong support for hackathons and collaborating with academia, absolutely. So Kim, back to you. We've seen a lot of, again, emergent legislation changes differentials between the US approach, the Californian approach, which was, I mean, just vetoed, the most recent one, a couple of days ago. The European Union has its own AI Act. The UK operates in a different space to all of them. How have you had to innovate your internal governance structures and respond to these things? And is it hampering, or is it something that you're able to flow like water around?
So the way we're looking at it is regionally, right? And so looking at the governance that's required per region and bringing that back to a central governance structure. So it's really not that much different to me than solving for a regulatory requirement that's specific to Europe or specific to Ireland or wherever versus Canada or the US. So we're following that same approach. And it's not that it's hampering innovation, it's that it's enabling us actually to look at how we're attacking the process versus letting it rule us. Like we're trying to rule it versus, it ruling us.
I think the concept of attacking a process is something we can all resonate with. Yeah. Right, we're at time. Thank you very much for all the erudite contributions. Please give the panel a warm hand.